The sidearm clicked empty for the seventh time that morning. Captain Zara Ghost, Mikhailova ejected the magazine with practiced precision, her calloused fingers working the mechanism that had betrayed 3 operators in the last month. The weapon felt foreign in her hands now, not because she'd forgotten how to use it, but because she'd been grounded for 8 months, relegated to armory duty while her squadron flew missions she'd once led. The testing range echoed with the hollow sound of her boots against concrete as she moved to the next station. Each failed trigger pull was another reminder of why she was here instead of 30,000 feet above enemy territory. The incident report still sat in her file. Failure to follow direct orders during Operation Nightfall. Pilot exhibited reckless endangerment of personnel. What it didn't mention was the 12 lives she'd saved by ignoring those orders. Behind her, the range door opened with its familiar hydraulic hiss. She didn't turn around. Visitors to the underground armory were rare, and she'd grown accustomed to solitude. The footsteps were measured, deliberate, the kind that belonged to someone accustomed to command. Still, she continued her work, field stripping the pistol with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Captain Mikhailova. The voice carried authority wrapped in uncertainty. She finally looked up to see a man in dress blues, his chest decorated with ribbons she recognized but had never earned herself. Colonel something or other, she assumed, though his face was unfamiliar. What caught her attention wasn't his rank or his crisp uniform. It was the small rectangular patch on his right shoulder, barely visible beneath his jacket. The patch bore a stylized aircraft silhouette over crossed lightning bolts, surrounded by stars that seemed to shimmer in the fluorescent light. She'd seen that insignia only once before, tattooed in black ink on her left shoulder blade, a memorial to a squadron that officially didn't exist. Her fingers unconsciously moved toward the spot where the tattoo lay hidden beneath her utility shirt. "Do I know you?" she asked, though something in his eyes suggested the answer was more complicated than yes or no. The colonel's gaze moved from her face to her hands, still holding the disassembled weapon, then back to her eyes with an intensity that made the sterile room feel suddenly smaller. He stepped closer and she noticed something else, a slight limp in his left leg, the kind that came from ejecting at high altitude. "You don't remember me," he said, "but I remember you. And right now, Captain, we need someone who knows how to ignore orders when lives are at stake." The words hung in the recycled air like smoke from a distant fire, carrying implications that made her pulse quicken for the first time in months. 8 months earlier, Ghost had been the youngest squadron leader in the 492nd Fighter Wing, commanding 12 F-35 Lightning II aircraft from a forward operating base that appeared on no official maps. The base, designated Outpost 77, sat carved into a mountain range where 3 hostile nations met, its existence known only to a handful of Pentagon officials and the operators who called it home. The morning of Operation Nightfall began like any other, pre-dawn briefings in a bunker that smelled of coffee and determination, pilots checking weather reports that meant the difference between success and body bags. Ghost stood before the tactical display, her auburn hair pulled back in regulation style, green eyes studying satellite imagery that had been taken 6 hours earlier. Too old to be reliable, but it was what they had. "Primary target is a communication relay station," she told her squadron, using a laser pointer to highlight a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley 40 miles northeast of their position. "Intel suggests minimal air defense, but we all know how reliable that's been lately." A few pilots chuckled grimly. 3 weeks earlier, minimal air defense had meant 2 surface-to-air missile sites that had nearly claimed Phoenix and Raptor. Lieutenant Marcus Viper Chen raised his hand from the back row. At 24, he was the squadron's newest pilot, eager in the way that reminded Ghost uncomfortably of herself at that age. "Ma'am, what about civilian populations? The satellite shows structures that could be residential." Ghost nodded approvingly. "Good pilots asked hard questions. Rules of engagement are strict. No engagement unless we can confirm military targets, We're not here to create martyrs. She clicked to the next slide, showing their flight path through the mountain passes. We go in low and fast, hit the relay and extract. Time on target, 47 minutes from wheels up. The briefing continued for another 20 minutes, covering contingencies, communication protocols, and emergency procedures. When it ended, the pilots dispersed to their aircraft with the ritual efficiency of professionals who knew that preparation was the only thing standing between them and the infinite blue of an unmarked grave. Ghost's Lightning II sat in Hangar C, its stealth coating gleaming dully under the LED work lights. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, her crew chief, was making final checks on the weapon systems, his weathered hands moving over control surfaces with the tenderness of a father tucking in a child. "She's ready, Captain," Rodriguez said, pride evident in his voice. "Full fuel load, targeting systems are calibrated, and I've loaded the new encryption protocols for the mission." Ghost nodded, running her own pre-flight inspection. The aircraft was a work of art disguised as a machine of war, angular surfaces designed to scatter radar waves, engines that could push her past Mach 1.6, and enough computational power to track dozens of targets simultaneously. But more than that, it was her partner in a dance that required perfect trust between human and machine. "Rodriguez," she said quietly, "if something goes wrong today—" "Nothing's going wrong today, ma'am," he interrupted gently. "You bring her home safe and I'll have coffee waiting." The mission began perfectly. Ghost Squadron lifted off in pairs, their aircraft disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness like mechanical ghosts. The Lightning IIs flew in complete radio silence, navigating by GPS and terrain-following radar through mountain passes so narrow that wingtip clearance was measured in feet rather than yards. Ghost led from the front, her aircraft designated Vanguard 1, with Viper flying as her wingman in Vanguard 2. Behind them, the other 10 aircraft spread out in a loose formation that would tighten as they approached the target area. The mission profile called for a coordinated strike, simultaneous hits on the communication relay, power station, and backup generators to ensure complete destruction of the enemy's regional command capability. 32 minutes into the flight, Ghost's radar warning receiver chirped softly in her headset. The sound was barely audible, designed not to startle, but every pilot knew what it meant. Someone was painting them with targeting radar. She glanced at her threat display, expecting to see the characteristic signature of a surface-to-air missile system. Instead, she saw something that made her blood run cold. "Vanguard 1 to all units," she whispered into her microphone, using the emergency protocol that would cut through any radio jamming. "We have multiple fighter aircraft inbound from the northeast. Count 12, possibly more. This is not a drill." The response was immediate and professional. "Vanguard 3, copy. I have them on scope. Bearing 045, altitude Angels 20, closure rate. Christ, they're moving fast." Ghost's mind raced through possibilities. Intelligence had indicated that the enemy possessed only a handful of operational aircraft, mostly older generation fighters that posed minimal threat to her advanced Lightning IIs. But the radar signatures on her display told a different story. These aircraft were modern, fast, and flying in formation patterns that suggested sophisticated training. "Vanguard Lead, this is Control," crackled the voice of Major Hendricks from the Operations Center at Outpost 77. "Abort mission immediately. Return to base. You are not, repeat not, authorized to engage." Ghost's thumb hovered over the radio transmit button. Standard operating procedure was clear. When facing unexpected opposition, withdraw and reassess. But something about the situation felt wrong. The enemy fighters were positioned perfectly to intercept her squadron's planned egress route, as if they'd known exactly when and where the American aircraft would be. "Control, Vanguard Lead, requesting clarification. Are we looking at a potential ambush scenario?" "Negative, Vanguard Lead. Intelligence indicates these are routine patrols. Return to base immediately. But Ghost's instruments told a different story. The enemy aircraft were accelerating, their flight path clearly intended to intercept her squadron. If they turned back now, they'd be running straight into a trap. She made a decision that would define the rest of her career. All Vanguard units, this is lead. We're going to complete the mission. Stay tight, stay sharp, and trust your training. Vanguard lead control. You are ordered to abort. Do not engage. Ghost switched off her radio. The next 18 minutes unfolded like a deadly ballet performed at supersonic speeds. Ghost led her squadron through a series of tactical maneuvers that transformed them from a bombing formation into a fighting unit. The Lightning IIs climbed rapidly, their stealth characteristics providing crucial seconds of invisibility as they positioned for the engagement that now seemed inevitable. Vanguard units, this is lead, Ghost transmitted on the squadron frequency. Enemy fighters are moving to intercept our egress route. We have two options: fight our way out or complete the mission and find another way home. I'm choosing option 3. We complete the mission and fight our way out. The response from her pilots was immediate and reassuring. These weren't fresh academy graduates. They were experienced combat pilots who understood that sometimes survival meant choosing the most dangerous path. Viper's voice came through clearly. Lead, Vanguard 2. We're with you. Ghost's tactical display showed the enemy fighters spreading into an attack formation, their intent now unmistakable. But she also noticed something else. They were positioning to intercept the original flight path, not accounting for the squadron's current position. Either their intelligence was outdated or they were overconfident. Both possibilities could be exploited. Vanguard 3 and 4 break off and engage the northern group. 5 and 6 take the southern element. Everyone else were going straight through the middle to the target. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and don't give them time to think. The Lightning IIs accelerated to attack speed, their advanced engines pushing the aircraft through Mach 1.2 as they closed with their targets. Ghost's heads-up display filled with targeting information, range, bearing, missile lock indicators, and the constant stream of data that modern air combat required. But beneath all the technology, the engagement came down to the same fundamental elements that had defined aerial warfare since the Wright brothers: speed, altitude, and the ability to see the enemy before they saw you. The first missiles launched simultaneously from both sides, leaving contrails in the thin air like deadly brushstrokes across the sky. Ghost's aircraft shuddered as she released 2 AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles at a target designated Bandit 3, then immediately rolled into a steep dive to avoid the incoming fire. Her radar warning receiver screamed warnings as enemy missiles searched for her aircraft, their active seekers painting her Lightning II with targeting energy. Vanguard lead, missile launch. Bandit 1 has fired on you. Ghost pulled her aircraft into a vertical climb, the G-forces pressing her into her ejection seat as she deployed chaff and flares to confuse the incoming missile. The Lightning II's stealth characteristics worked both ways. They made her harder to target, but they also limited her own sensors. She was flying partially blind, relying on her wingman's eyes and her own instincts to stay alive. The sky around her erupted in explosions and radio chatter as the engagement reached its peak intensity. Through the chaos of aerial combat, Ghost maintained focus on her primary objective. While her squadron engaged the enemy fighters, she and Viper pushed through to the target area, their Lightning IIs racing across the valley floor at treetop level. The communication relay station appeared exactly as intelligence had predicted, a cluster of concrete buildings surrounded by satellite dishes and transmission towers. But Ghost's trained eye immediately recognized what the satellite imagery had missed. Parked in a camouflaged revetment beside the main building was a mobile command post, its distinctive antenna array identifying it as a regional coordination center. More importantly, she could see personnel moving around the facility, not military technicians, but civilians in what appeared to be Red Cross vests. "Viper, do you see what I'm seeing?" she asked, banking her aircraft for a better view. "Copy, lead. That's definitely a humanitarian operation down there. Looks like a medical facility." Ghost's heart sank. The intelligence briefing had made no mention of civilian infrastructure. The communication relay they'd been sent to destroy was apparently being used to coordinate medical evacuations from a combat zone. Destroying it would cut off emergency communications for dozens of refugee camps. "Control, this is Vanguard Lead," she transmitted, temporarily reactivating her radio. "Target area contains civilian medical facilities, requesting updated rules of engagement." The response came not from Major Hendricks but from a voice she didn't recognize, someone higher up the chain of command. "Vanguard Lead, your orders remain unchanged. Destroy the target and return to base." Ghost stared at the facility below, watching medical personnel loading wounded civilians into evacuation helicopters. Her missiles were armed and ready. A single trigger pull would complete the mission and eliminate what her superiors considered a legitimate military target. But she also knew that the explosion would destroy the only communication link keeping those humanitarian operations functioning. "Viper, mark this location and fall back to Rally Point Alpha. We're not hitting this target." "Lead, that's not what Control ordered." "Control isn't down here looking at Red Cross tents," Ghost replied, pulling her aircraft into a climb. "Sometimes you have to choose between following orders and following your conscience." As they rejoined the main formation, Ghost could see that the aerial engagement was turning in their favor. Several enemy aircraft had been destroyed, and the remainder were withdrawing to the northeast. Her squadron had taken damage. Vanguard 7 was trailing fuel vapor, and 9 reported hydraulic problems, but all 12 aircraft were still airborne and capable of making it home. The flight back to Outpost 77 passed in relative silence, each pilot lost in private thoughts about what they'd witnessed and what it meant for their futures. Ghost knew that her decision to abort the strike would trigger an investigation, probably ending her command and possibly her career. But as she watched the sun rise over the mountains ahead, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months: peace with her choices. The debriefing took place in the same bunker where the mission had been planned 8 hours earlier, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Instead of confident pilots preparing for a routine strike, Ghost faced a panel of senior officers whose expressions ranged from disappointment to barely concealed anger. Colonel Morrison, the base commander, sat at the center of the table, flanked by intelligence officers and representatives from higher headquarters. "Captain Mikhailova," Morrison began, his voice carefully neutral, "your after-action report indicates that you made an unauthorized decision to abort the primary mission objective. Is this correct?" Ghost stood at attention, her hands clasped behind her back. "Yes, sir. The target area contained civilian medical facilities that were not identified in the intelligence briefing. Destroying the communication relay would have disrupted humanitarian operations. And you made this determination without consulting with your chain of command." "I did consult with Control, sir. I was ordered to proceed with the mission despite the civilian presence." Morrison's expression didn't change, but Ghost caught a flicker of something, surprise, perhaps, or recognition, that the situation was more complex than it initially appeared. He opened a folder and pulled out several aerial photographs, spreading them across the table. "These images were taken by a reconnaissance drone 4 hours after your squadron returned to base," he said. "Please examine them carefully." Ghost looked at the photographs, her breath catching in her throat. The communication facility was gone, replaced by a smoking crater. The medical tents had vanished, along with the evacuation helicopters and the personnel she'd seen working to save civilian lives. "Sir, I don't understand. We didn't engage the target." "No, Captain, you didn't. But 30 minutes after your squadron departed the area, the facility was struck by artillery fire from enemy positions in the surrounding hills. Every person you saw, medical personnel, patients, helicopter crews, was killed in the bombardment. The words hit Ghost like a physical blow. She stared at the photographs, trying to process what Morrison was telling her. Are you saying that the facility was a trap? We're saying that the enemy used humanitarian operations as cover for a military communications center, knowing that American pilots would hesitate to engage civilian targets. When you failed to destroy the relay, they eliminated the evidence themselves to prevent us from discovering their deception. Ghost felt the room spinning around her. The civilians she tried to protect had been murdered by the same enemy forces that had used them as human shields. Her moment of moral clarity had accomplished nothing except to delay the inevitable by 30 minutes. Captain, Morrison continued, your decision to disobey direct orders resulted in the failure of a critical mission and the loss of civilian lives that might have been prevented if the facility had been destroyed quickly. You'll be relieved of command pending a full investigation. As Ghost left the briefing room, she passed her squadron mates in the corridor. Their faces showed a mixture of sympathy and confusion. They understood her decision, but they also understood the consequences. In the military, good intentions didn't excuse bad results. For 8 months, Ghost had replayed that mission in her mind, analyzing every decision, every radio call, every moment when a different choice might have led to a different outcome. The investigation had concluded that while her intentions were honorable, her failure to follow orders had compromised the mission and contributed to the civilian casualties she tried to prevent. She was transferred to armory duty at Outpost 77, grounded indefinitely while the bureaucracy decided whether she deserved a court-martial or just a quiet exit from the service. Now, standing in the underground testing range with a colonel whose insignia matched her hidden tattoo, Ghost felt the weight of those 8 months pressing down on her shoulders. The man studied her face as if searching for something specific, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a hint of recognition. Operation Nightfall wasn't what it appeared to be, he said quietly. The intelligence you received was deliberately incomplete. The enemy fighters that intercepted your squadron were there because someone leaked your flight plan. The civilian medical facility was a setup designed to test how American pilots would react when faced with an impossible choice. Ghost's hands clenched involuntarily around the disassembled pistol. You're saying we were manipulated. I'm saying that everything about that mission was designed to put you in an unwinnable situation. The question is, what did you learn from it? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. Ghost thought about the months of isolation, the daily routine of testing weapons instead of flying aircraft, the gnawing doubt that had followed her since the debriefing. What had she learned? That good intentions weren't enough, that the enemy would exploit any hesitation, that sometimes there were no right answers, only choices with different kinds of consequences. I learned that the enemy will use our humanity against us, she said finally. But I also learned that losing our humanity is worse than losing a mission. The colonel nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he'd hoped to hear. Captain, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. Operation Nightfall was a test, not of your squadron's combat capabilities, but of your leadership under impossible circumstances. You were selected specifically because your psychological profile indicated you would prioritize civilian lives over mission completion. Ghost stared at him, pieces of a larger puzzle beginning to fall into place. Selected by whom? By people who need a pilot willing to make hard choices, even when those choices go against direct orders. The kind of pilot who can see through deception and act on principle rather than policy. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder marked with classification stamps she didn't recognize. Captain, how would you like to fly again? The offer hung between them like a lifeline thrown to a drowning swimmer. After 8 months of exile, the possibility of returning to the cockpit felt almost too good to believe. The colonel introduced himself as Marcus Reaper Valdez, though Ghost suspected that wasn't his real name. He led her through a series of underground corridors she'd never seen before, past security checkpoints that required biometric scans and clearance codes changed daily. The deeper they went into the mountain, the more sophisticated the security became, until they reached a blast door that looked like it could withstand a direct nuclear strike. "Welcome to Blackbird Station," Valdez said as the door cycled open with a deep mechanical hum. "Officially, this facility doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's where we prepare for missions that never happened." The hangar beyond the blast door took Ghost's breath away. 6 aircraft sat in individual bays, their sleek profiles unlike anything she'd ever seen. They resembled the Lightning II in basic configuration, but everything about them was more advanced: sharper angles, more sophisticated sensor arrays, and engine intakes that suggested capabilities far beyond conventional fighters. "F-47 Phantom Ravens," Valdez explained, nodding her expression. "Fifth-generation plus stealth fighters designed for operations that require absolute deniability. Faster than anything in the sky, invisible to radar, and capable of carrying payloads that can change the outcome of conflicts without anyone knowing we were there." Ghost walked slowly around the nearest aircraft, her trained eye cataloging the differences from standard fighters. The Phantom Raven was beautiful in the way that apex predators were beautiful, every line optimized for lethality, every surface designed to slip through enemy defenses like a whisper of death. "What kind of missions?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "The kind where failure isn't an option and success can never be acknowledged. The kind where a pilot's judgment matters more than their willingness to follow orders." Valdez stopped beside her, his reflection distorted in the aircraft's stealth coating. "Captain, are you familiar with the Lazarus Protocol?" Ghost shook her head. The name meant nothing to her, but something in Valdez's tone suggested it should. "Lazarus is activated when traditional military responses are inadequate to address a threat, when diplomacy has failed, when conventional forces can't reach the target, when the consequences of inaction outweigh the risks of unauthorized intervention." He turned to face her directly. "Lazarus operators work outside normal command structures. They receive their orders from a joint committee that includes representatives from defense, state, and intelligence. They have authority to act on their own initiative when time doesn't permit consultation." The implications were staggering. Ghost was being offered a position in what amounted to a military organization within the military, operating with minimal oversight and maximum responsibility. It was everything she dreamed of as a young pilot, and everything she'd learned to fear as an experienced officer. "Why me?" she asked. "There are hundreds of pilots with better records, more experience, fewer black marks in their files." Valdez smiled for the first time since entering the armory. "Because, Captain, we don't need pilots who follow orders perfectly. We need pilots who know when not to follow orders at all." The briefing for Ghost's first Lazarus mission took place in a conference room carved directly from the mountain's bedrock. The walls were lined with screens displaying satellite imagery, intelligence reports, and tactical assessments that updated in real time. At the head of the table sat a woman Ghost didn't recognize, a civilian in an expensive suit whose presence commanded attention without effort. "Captain Mikhailova," the woman began, "I'm Director Sarah Chen from the Defense Intelligence Agency. What we're about to discuss cannot leave this room under any circumstances. The operation we're planning doesn't officially exist, and if it succeeds, it never will." Ghost nodded, settling into her chair as the implications of joining Lazarus became more concrete. She was entering a world where success meant invisibility and failure could trigger international incidents. 72 hours ago," Chen continued, Our signals intelligence intercepted communications indicating that a terrorist organization has acquired a nuclear device. Not a dirty bomb, a fully functional tactical warhead with an estimated yield of 12 kilotons. The screens around the room displayed intercepts of radio communications, satellite photos of suspicious activity, and intelligence assessments that painted a picture of imminent catastrophe. Ghost studied the information with growing alarm, recognizing patterns that suggested the terrorists weren't amateurs. The device is currently located in a facility here, Chen said, highlighting a compound in a mountainous region that appeared to be in the Middle East. Our intelligence indicates they plan to transport it to a major population center within the next 48 hours. Conventional military action is impossible. The compound is located in the territory of a nominal ally who would consider any unauthorized military operation an act of war. Ghost leaned forward, studying the satellite imagery more closely. The compound was heavily fortified, surrounded by natural obstacles that would make a ground assault nearly impossible. But she also noticed something else. The facility was located near a narrow mountain pass, the kind of terrain that limited approach routes and escape options. "What's the proposed solution?" she asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Single aircraft, single pilot surgical strike to destroy the nuclear device before it can be moved. The Phantom Raven's stealth capabilities should allow penetration of enemy airspace without detection. Time on target, 14 minutes. Mission duration, 3 hours, 27 minutes. Valdez activated a holographic display that showed the proposed flight path in 3 dimensions. The route was a masterpiece of tactical planning, threading through radar gaps, following terrain features that would mask the aircraft's approach, and timing the strike for a moment when intelligence suggested minimal civilian presence. "The warhead is stored in a hardened bunker beneath the main facility," he explained. "Standard ordnance won't penetrate deep enough to ensure destruction. You'll be carrying a single GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, 30,000 pounds of precision death designed to crack any bunker ever built." Ghost studied the mission profile with the analytical mind of a professional warrior. The plan was audacious, risky, and dependent on intelligence that might be outdated by the time she reached the target. It was also exactly the kind of mission that could prevent thousands of civilian deaths if executed successfully. "What happens if I'm shot down?" she asked. Chen's expression didn't change. "You won't be." Pre-flight preparations for a Lazarus mission bore little resemblance to conventional military operations. Instead of a bustling flight line with dozens of personnel, Ghost found herself alone in Hangar 6 with a single technician who spoke only when necessary. The Phantom Raven sat beneath harsh LED lights, its weapons bay loaded with the massive penetrator bomb that would either save thousands of lives or trigger an international crisis. The technician, who introduced himself only as Murphy, conducted the final systems check with methodical precision. Unlike Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who treated aircraft like beloved children, Murphy approached the Phantom Raven like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation, respectful, focused, and completely professional. "All systems are green," Murphy reported, his voice carrying no emotion whatsoever. "Flight controls, navigation, weapons systems, electronic countermeasures, and stealth coatings are all within optimal parameters. Fuel load is calculated to provide 15 minutes of loiter time over target." Ghost completed her own pre-flight inspection, familiarizing herself with the Phantom Raven's advanced systems. The cockpit was a marvel of ergonomic design, with displays and controls arranged to minimize pilot workload during high-stress situations. But beneath all the technology, the fundamentals remained the same: stick, rudder, throttle, and the ancient dance between human intuition and mechanical precision. "Murphy," she said as she climbed into the cockpit, "what happens if this goes wrong?" The technician paused in his final checks, looking up at her with eyes that had seen too much. Ma'am, in my experience, missions like this don't go wrong. They either go right or they go catastrophically wrong. There's no middle ground. Ghost strapped herself into the ejection seat, feeling the familiar embrace of 5-point harnesses and life support connections. The Phantom Raven's engines spooled up with a sound like controlled thunder, their advanced design producing thrust levels that pushed the boundaries of what current materials could withstand. Blackbird Control, this is Ghost 1 requesting permission for departure. Ghost 1 Blackbird Control, you are cleared for immediate departure. Weather is clear, winds are calm, and your window opens in 90 seconds. Good hunting. The hangar doors opened to reveal a launch tube that stretched deep into the mountain. Instead of a conventional runway, the Phantom Raven would be accelerated by an electromagnetic catapult system, similar to those used on aircraft carriers, but far more powerful. Ghost felt the catapult engage, pressing her back into her seat as the aircraft shot through the launch tube like a bullet from a rifle. 30 seconds later, she emerged into daylight, climbing rapidly toward the ceiling of the world where the Phantom Raven would begin its journey toward a target that might hold the key to preventing nuclear terrorism. Below her, the mountain peaks fell away like stepping stones across an ocean of stone and snow. For the first time in 8 months, Ghost was flying again. The Phantom Raven performed like a dream at altitude, its advanced engines pushing the aircraft through Mach 2.3 with an efficiency that would have been impossible in earlier generations of fighters. Ghost settled into the rhythm of long-distance flight, monitoring systems, checking navigation waypoints, and maintaining the heightened awareness that separated professional pilots from weekend warriors. At flight level 660,000 feet above sea level, the sky took on the deep purple hue that marked the boundary between atmosphere and space. Stars were visible during daylight, pinpricks of ancient light scattered across an infinite canvas. Ghost had always found peace at extreme altitude, where the concerns of the surface world seemed as distant as the stars themselves. Ghost 1, this is Overwatch, came a voice through her encrypted communication system. We're tracking your progress. Current time to target is 2 hours, 14 minutes. Intelligence update indicates no change in threat assessment. Ghost acknowledged the transmission, though she knew that intelligence could change rapidly in the modern battlefield. The mission planners had done their best to predict enemy capabilities, but ultimately, she would be flying into unknown territory with nothing but her training and instincts to guide her through whatever waited ahead. As the Phantom Raven crossed into hostile airspace, Ghost activated the aircraft's full stealth profile. Electronic emissions dropped to virtually nothing, the airframe's radar signature became smaller than a bird's, and even the engine exhausts were masked by sophisticated baffling systems. To any observer, military or civilian, the sky above appeared empty. But Ghost knew she wasn't truly invisible. Modern radar systems were becoming increasingly sophisticated, and there were always new techniques being developed to detect stealth aircraft. The key was to minimize exposure time, strike quickly, and escape before enemy defenses could react effectively. Ghost 1 Overwatch. You're approaching the first navigation checkpoint. Be advised, we're tracking increased radio chatter from the target area, possible indication of heightened alert status. Ghost frowned, checking her displays for any sign of enemy activity. The intelligence briefing had suggested that the terrorist organization possessed minimal air defense capabilities, but minimal was a relative term when applied to people who had somehow acquired a nuclear weapon. Overwatch Ghost 1. Can you provide specifics on the radio traffic? Negative, Ghost 1. Communications are encrypted, but volume and frequency patterns suggest they may be expecting visitors. The implications were troubling. If the terrorists knew an attack was imminent, they might accelerate their timeline for moving the nuclear device. Worse, they might have prepared defenses that weren't accounted for in the mission planning. Ghost increased her speed, trading fuel efficiency for the advantage of reaching the target before the tactical situation could deteriorate further. As she approached the target area, Ghost began her descent from the stratosphere. The Phantom Raven's sophisticated flight control systems automatically adjusting to maintain optimal stealth characteristics at lower altitudes. The target compound appeared on Ghost's forward-looking infrared display as a cluster of heat signatures arranged around a central courtyard. Intelligence had been accurate about the facility's layout, several buildings connected by covered walkways, with the suspected bunker entrance located beneath the largest structure. But something about the thermal pattern seemed wrong. Overwatch Ghost 1. I'm seeing unusual heat signatures at the target. Looks like significantly more personnel than briefed. Ghost 1. Stand by for updated intelligence. Ghost circled at 15,000 feet, using the Phantom Raven's advanced sensors to build a comprehensive picture of the compound below. What she saw made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Instead of the dozen guards mentioned in the briefing, the facility appeared to house at least 50 people, many of them showing the thermal signatures associated with women and children. Ghost 1, Overwatch. Be advised, recent intelligence indicates the facility may be serving dual purposes. Recommend immediate engagement before target can be relocated. Ghost stared at her displays, watching thermal images of people moving through the compound below. Some appeared to be armed guards, but others looked like civilians, possibly family members of the terrorists, or worse, hostages being used as human shields. Overwatch, I need clarification on rules of engagement. Thermal imaging suggests significant civilian presence. Ghost 1, your orders remain unchanged. The nuclear device must be destroyed before it can be transported to a population center. Collateral damage is regrettable but acceptable given the potential consequences of mission failure. The words echoed with haunting familiarity. 8 months earlier, Ghost had faced a similar choice and had chosen to prioritize civilian lives over mission objectives. The result had been disaster for everyone involved. Now, flying alone over another compound where civilians and terrorists were intermingled, she faced the same impossible decision. But this time, the stakes were immeasurably higher. A nuclear weapon in terrorist hands could kill hundreds of thousands of people. The civilians in the compound below numbered perhaps 20 or 30. The arithmetic of warfare demanded their sacrifice to prevent a greater catastrophe. Ghost armed her weapon systems, the massive penetrator bomb coming online with a soft electronic chime that seemed absurdly gentle for such a destructive device. Her heads-up display showed targeting information overlaid on the compound below, with the suspected bunker location marked by a pulsing red symbol. Overwatch Ghost 1, beginning attack run. Copy Ghost 1, you are cleared to engage. Ghost rolled the Phantom Raven into a steep dive, lining up for a bombing run that would send 30,000 pounds of explosives into the heart of the compound. Her finger moved to the weapon release trigger, and for a moment, time seemed suspended between intention and action.